Hello and welcome to another exciting new episode of Talking About Stoicism. And I thought what we would do today is skip Seneca for 1 week and then come back to him next time. But talk about a concept that's very interesting, I think, in Stoicism, and that I have mentioned in the past, but I don't believe I've ever devoted a full video to it. And I do think it's a very interesting thought experiment. And that means we need to step away a little bit from Stoic ethics. Remember that Stoicism, as a school of philosophy, has 3 branches: ethics, logic, and physics. Logic really deals with pretty much what we would call logic today: reasoning, argumentation, etc. Ethics is what I've talked about almost exclusively in this series of videos, which is applying the principles of Stoicism to lead a good life, a life that is as carefree as possible, that is as mentally stable as possible. But then there also is Stoic physics. Now, when it comes to Stoic physics, of course you have to place that in the spirit of the age in which the Stoics lived. They did not have telescopes or large hadron colliders or these kinds of things, so their physics are fairly primitive and are really based on thinking about the universe as opposed to really going out and observing things. And they're also quite complicated, and I think a lot of the Stoic physics, of course, has been disproven now, because you can only reason about the universe so much. You have to go out and do experiments, but the whole idea of experimentation was not really a thing in the age of the Stoics. So, having said that, knowing that a lot of what the Stoics claimed about the universe, for example, that the entire universe is one rational being called the Logos, I don't think we would really believe that anymore this day and age. There still are some very interesting concepts, and one of the, in my mind, very interesting concepts in Stoic physics is that of the Great Conflagration. And this is in itself not a Stoic concept. There are philosophers before the Stoics who already thought about that, but the Stoics pretty willingly adopted that as a view of the end, but also rebirth of the universe. Now, the reason I had to think about this was that I just finished watching the series Dark on Netflix, which is fascinating but highly confusing, and trying not to give any spoilers. It has something to do with time travel and loops of time. And that kind of triggered this idea in me of maybe I should talk about the conflagration. So, the Stoics believed, like I said, some other philosophers before them, or schools of philosophy before them, that there is a phenomenon called the Great Conflagration. And the Great Conflagration is basically the end of our entire universe and us, but it's also at the same time our beginning again. And there actually is a modern theory in cosmology that is a little bit like that, but that's a coincidence. Like, that's not, the Stoics did not anticipate modern science or something. But it is interesting that there is a cosmological theory, which also, if I remember correctly, has been disproven, but the idea, or at least is fairly implausible based on some findings, but the idea is that the universe ends, but then also restarts, begins again. So that in itself is a very interesting thought, because a lot of people work on the premise of, well, the universe has to be created at some point, but who did the creation? Right? Or how did that happen? Is that some sort of divine being, or is it a Big Bang? But if there's a Big Bang, what caused the Big Bang? You can have all these kinds of interesting discussions. But if you look at it from the perspective of maybe there never was a beginning, maybe the universe has always been there and goes through phases where it kind of ends, it starts up again, and after a certain period of time it ends again, it starts up again, and that has always happened, then you can let go of the idea of it has to be created at some point. It's always been there. Now, for us, it's very, very difficult to picture, because everything we know has a beginning. At some point it had a beginning, and it likely will at some point have an end. But if you can try to let go of that for just a second and kind of think in terms of something has always been there and you just go through cycles of existence, non-existence, existence, non-existence, etc., that leads to very interesting thoughts, I think. Now, I have here a book by, it says ST, so I'm assuming St. George Stock. It's a reproduction of an older book on Stoicism. And I think he has a very nice way of describing this great conflagration. So, I quote, "The cosmos, as identical with God, was described as an individual made up of all being who is incorruptible and ungenerated, the fashioner of the ordered frame of the universe, who at certain periods of time absorbs all being into himself and again generates it from himself. Thus the cosmos on its external side was doomed to perish, and the mode of its destruction was to be by fire, a doctrine which has been stamped upon the world's belief down to the present day. What was to bring about this consummation was the soul of the universe becoming too big for its body, which it would eventually swallow up altogether. In the afflagration," this is the same as conflagration, he just uses the term afflagration, "when everything went back to the primeval ether, the universe would be pure soul and alive equally through and through. In this subtle and attenuated state, it would require more room than before, and so expand into the void, contracting again when another period of cosmic generation had set in. Hence, the Stoic definition of the void, or infinite, as that into which the cosmos is resolved at the afflagration. In this theory of the contraction of the universe out of an ethereal state and ultimate return to the same condition, one sees a resemblance to the modern scientific hypothesis of the origin of our planetary system out of the solar nebula and its predestined end in the same. Especially is this the case with the form in which the theory was held by Cleanthes, who pictured the heavenly bodies as hastening to their own destruction by dashing themselves like so many gigantic moths into the sun. Cleanthes, however, did not conceive mere mechanical force to be at work in this matter. The grand apotheosis of suicide which he foresaw was a voluntary act, for the heavenly bodies were gods and were willing to lose their own in a larger life." Now, so what the Stoics believed is that one day the universe will end in a great conflagration, a massive ball of fire, where, and I really like this very poetic way that Cleanthes describes it, all the celestial bodies just kind of throw themselves into that fire and everything burns up. Now, following the Stoic logic a bit further, what is very interesting, I find, is that the Stoics believed that only one being would actually survive the conflagration. All humans would die, all animals would die, the planets, the stars, everything would be gone, massive ball of fire, whoosh. But Zeus would survive. Zeus being the highest of the gods, Zeus would survive. And now here's where things get very interesting. Zeus would be left alone with his thoughts because the entire universe that he created is now gone. And when he decides the time is right, Zeus will recreate the entire universe. The entire universe, just the way it was before, will be recreated. Nothing will be different. And the reason nothing will be different, so reasoned the Stoics, is that Zeus is perfect. He's the highest of the gods. So the way Zeus created the universe the first time, he has to create it again the second time, because being a perfect God, he can't do it any other way but a perfect way. So everything will happen again. And, the Stoics continued, so this means that you have lived your life countless of times. And every time you live your life exactly the same way. And then you pass away, then there will be a conflagration. And then Zeus will recreate the universe. And at some point, when it is your time, you will be reborn. You'll be born and you will lead your life just the way you lived it the last time, and the time before that, and the time before that, and the time before that, all the way back to the start of time. And there's nothing you can do about it. This is how it works. Now, there is a lot, of course, to argue about this theory, and it's not exactly scientific theory. Although, again, there is a scientific theory. There's a little bit like this, that you kind of go through these cycles in the universe. But what I find very interesting is that the concept of, and then everything is made just like it was before. And often when I discuss this concept with people, they say, oh, but that's great, because you've learned from that previous life, and then you can try to avoid making the mistakes that you made the first time. But that's not how it works. You will lead your life exactly the way you led it the last time. After all, that's how Zeus created the universe. And he did it perfectly the first time. So every mistake you made last time, you will make again, and again, and again, unto eternity. Every bad thing you have done, you'll do again. But every good thing you've done, you will do again as well. Because that is the way you were meant to lead your life. Now, some people I found find this a very depressing concept, because they say, oh, so every mistake, everything I've done poorly, I will do again. Now, the Stoics would say, yes, you would. But that's the reason to try to live the best life you can in the first place. Because if you really try to apply Stoic principles and really do your best and really do good and try to live with wisdom and make good decisions and be kind to all these things, what's there to worry about? You've done your best. And I think that is a nice motivator, just as a thought experiment. Again, scientifically, I don't think there's a reason to believe this is really how things work. But just as a thought experiment, imagine that were true. Imagine that you've lived your life so many times. Imagine you're going to live it an infinite number of times, exactly the same way. But you don't remember that. You don't remember anything from the past. As long as you try to do as well as you can, you're leading the best life you can. And as a result, what can really go wrong? You're doing your best. Now, of course, this argument falls apart fairly quickly, because there's only one way for you to lead your life. That's what Zeus has preordained for you. That's what you have to do, so there isn't really any choice. But I wouldn't take the argument that far. I would just think of it as a motivator to do as well as you can. And then one day will be your last day. And just imagine what it would be like if there truly at some point would be a great conflagration. And then the whole universe is recreated. And we can't know whether that has not happened. Right? We can't really know that. What if it's true? Ooh. It's just an interesting thing to think about. It also means you're immortal. Because even though you will die, you will be recreated and live again and again and again and again. That's an interesting concept. So, this is certainly not something that I say, oh yes, I absolutely believe this is true. I don't really. But I find it interesting because it allows me to think about just a fascinating concept. And I think that's a lot of fun. So, let me know what you think about the Great Conflagration. Whether you find this terrifying or comforting, because I found it's typically one or the other, but nothing in between. And that's it. Thank you for watching. I hope this was an interesting side excursion, and I'll gladly see you later. Bye.